Speaker.
Darian Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Take a point of order, Mr. Take a point of order.
I'm sure
point of order.
I could indulge on my colleague from the Labour Party and say, look, seeing as I was the subject of that very unwarranted attack...
Order. That's not a point of order, and the member will get a call in due course to deal with those matters. Darian Fenton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to support this bill in first reading to the Select Committee. And also pleased to see the actions of the government in attempting to deal with the growing issue of migrant worker abuse. I'm yet to be convinced that it does everything it needs, and I'll talk to that a little bit more, Mr. Speaker. We are seeing things in New Zealand that we have never seen before with migrant worker abuse, and particularly where I live in Auckland. Many MPs will have had migrants come to see them to talk about what's happening for them. I was an MP that had the masala workers from the Indian restaurant chain who came to see me, and their stories were horrific. They were being required to live on the premises. They had basically had their jobs sold to them for something like $10,000, and it turned out they were being paid something like $4 an hour minimum wage. Now, I'm pleased to say I went to see the then Minister, well, it wasn't the Immigration Minister, it was Simon Bridges, and reported that to him as the Minister of Labour, and reported that to him, and then there was an investigation, and I've also had an update from the Labour inspectors in Auckland on that particular case. And what they tell me is, I know they're working hard on it, but it's really, really hard to get the information to get the prosecution happening. So while it sounds straightforward, it can be very complicated. It goes to the records that the business is keeping, whether they're accurate or not, whether they're phony, that can happen. And it also goes to having migrants that are prepared to speak out. So on the one hand, I agree with the Minister that we need migrants to stand up and say, and speak out when they are being exploited in this way. But on the other hand, I think it has to go hand in hand with really good inspection powers, both of immigration and of the Labour Department. And I've repeatedly said that I don't believe that there are enough inspectors, Labour inspectors. There are not enough to deal with the health and safety issues we've got, let alone the issue of migrant worker abuse. And what it really needs is a team of people who go from place to place and inspect the wage and time records like they used to. Labour inspectors used to do that, and talk to the people on the ground and just dig out these cases rather than waiting for poor migrants to stand up and say, I'm being exploited, because the difficulties that they face are enormous. Job selling is something that we've never seen in New Zealand until recently, and it's an abhorrent and disgusting practice where people who are desperate for work because their visas depend on it, because they want to stay here and they also want to support and feed their families, are absolutely exploited by people who basically, what they do is they sell them a job. So they go, I will get you a job, and if you pay $10,000 or $20,000, you can have this job, but you don't get paid. Actually, they pay for their own job. And we've seen a lot of that. We've seen it, I think my colleague Rajan Prasad talked about the student visa issue. There are issues with students who are able to work 20 hours a week. And there are also issues with the graduate visa program where people, if they want to use the graduate visa program to work towards resident, have to do a management, have a management job. So we've got managers in Burger King and shift supervisors. No, they're managers. They're managers and cleaning motels, but they're called managers. So they meet the requirements of the visa requirements in terms of working towards residence, and that's just simply another form of exploitation. So, I would want to emphasise that one of the questions that we'll be asking a lot about with this bill during the Select Committee stages is about resourcing, and I am looking forward to hearing from migrant groups, and I think it will be very instructive for the Select Committee to hear from migrants themselves. Sometimes we'll be represented by migrant organisations, so I suspect the Migrant Action Trust will have a lot to say, and also Dennis Marga's organisation, which is Migranti, and that's called something else now, isn't it? Unimig, who is a really good advocate for migrants in New Zealand and is constantly speaking out and can speak not only from his own experience but also from the experience of the people that he's represented. I think there are some issues around employment law, and when I spoke to Simon Bridges about the Masala situation, he indicated to me that there was going to be a package. And the Minister, Michael Woodhouse, just said before that this is a package of measures. I have no idea what the other parts of the package are, and it would be good to have some indication of that as we go through this. What it does need is some changes to labour law. It needs just some strengthening around that. Unfortunately, I have to say it, Mr Speaker, we're not seeing changes to labour law going in the right way that are going to provide protection and make it easier for migrant workers. They're going backwards, and it was very pleasing to hear the Minister of Labour today assuring me that he is listening and taking into consideration the submissions around 6A, because in fact it's mainly migrant workers that end up in low-paid cleaners jobs. Those are the ones that are most vulnerable to exploitation, and it's another form of exploitation if their jobs can be sold to the lowest bidder and they're dumped on the scrap heap with no redundancy paid, nowhere to go. And so, you can't. A package would include actually not changing the Employment Relations Act in the way the Minister's proposing. It would include actually strengthening it and making it easier for migrant workers to access their rights, and also looking at things like the Wages Protection Act and prosecutions. One of the things I've been told by migrant advocates, Mr Speaker, is it's very hard, even if you get, the Department of Labour can prosecute, it's hard enough for them, but migrant advocates have migrant workers who come to them who have clearly been exploited, the employer has clearly broken the law, and trying to take that through a court case is incredibly difficult, particularly where the employers themselves have new migrants and have set up a business, and there's all sorts of veils, corporate veils and other things that cannot be unravelled. And so while migrant workers often win a court case that exposes the breaches of employment law that they've been subjected to, they can't get any enforcement. The remedies are just simply impossible to obtain because the business disappears or doesn't have any money or it's hidden somewhere. And so there needs to be some consideration, I think, given to the Wages Protection Act, where we're not just able to prosecute employers but actually individuals. And I think, again, we'll hear from lawyers who represent migrant workers in these situations, and I know that they're quite strong on that. We do need to take this very seriously with the Christchurch rebuild as well. And we have heard stories, of course, already, and I understand that the last thing I heard is the Department of Labour was investigating 12 breaches for migrant workers who've come to New Zealand and Christchurch. Again, I don't think they're resourced to do the job that needs to be done, given that we're going to have 17,000 migrants in the Christchurch rebuild, round about 4 inspectors, and immigration officers that are actually not going to have people in them. They're going to be online presence rather than enforcement. So I think that we do have to consider very seriously how we make this happen, if we're serious about stopping migrant worker abuse, we have to think about how we help make it happen rather than simply sitting back and expecting migrants to come forward. And, I look forward to the discussion on that. The only other thing I'd say about this bill, Mr Speaker, is that there's some things in it that seem to have come from the 2009 Act, seem to have been left over. And maybe we were rejected at the time, and we'll be looking very closely at those, and I'm sure that we'll have as much interest in those issues as we did in the 2009 Immigration Act, when actually it was passed under Labour and when we went through a very extensive select committee process. But as I said, I'm pleased to support this bill. We will closely scrutinise it. It is good that the government's taking some steps to deal with this very serious issue that could get completely out of control if we don't do something soon.
Jan Logie.